I am Kiara, 33 years old, and for 15 years, my parents treated me like a useless college dropout struggling just to survive. They loved to parade their perfect high society life in Atlanta while pretending I barely existed. They never knew what I truly did for a living until the night my 82-year-old grandmother sent me a secret coded plea for help. Exactly 30 minutes later, I arrived at their sprawling estate, flanked by two police officers, and that was just the beginning of their downfall. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The humid Georgia night air clung to my skin as I hammered my fist against the massive mahogany double doors of my parents' gated estate in Buckhead. The sheer size of the house with its towering white columns and perfectly manicured hedges had always been a monument to their obsession with wealth and status. Tonight it felt like a fortress holding the only person who ever truly loved me hostage. Behind me stood two local police officers, their expressions a mix of skepticism and late-night exhaustion. I hit the wood again harder this time, feeling the dull ache in my knuckles. I was not leaving without answers. The heavy door finally swung open. My mother Cynthia stood framed in the warm entryway light. She wore a flawless silk designer robe, her hair wrapped meticulously, projecting the pristine image of the Atlanta socialite she had spent her entire life cultivating. The moment her eyes landed on me, her carefully maintained expression of mild annoyance twisted into pure, unfiltered disgust. She did not greet me. She did not even look me in the eye. Instead, she immediately shifted her attention over my shoulder to the two uniformed men standing on her porch. Officers. I am so sorry for this ridiculous disturbance at such a late hour, she said, her voice dripping with practiced Southern charm, layered heavily over ice. I apologize on behalf of my daughter. She is a college dropout who constantly shows up here harassing us for handouts. She has been unstable for years. Honestly, she needs a psychiatric hold, not a police escort to our front door. The lies rolled off her tongue with terrifying ease. For 15 years, this was the exact narrative she had spun to her country club friends, her charity boards, and anyone who would listen. Because I had rejected their suffocating world of debutante balls and corporate ladders, choosing instead to forge my own path out of their shadow, I became the designated family scapegoat. I was the cautionary tale she used to make herself look like a suffering, benevolent matriarch dealing with a troubled child. But tonight her lies meant absolutely nothing to me. I cut through her theatrical performance without missing a single beat. Save the community theater act, Mother, I said, my voice sharp and entirely steady. I turned my phone screen directly toward the older of the two officers. I am not here for a handout. I am here because my 82-year-old grandmother, who resides in this house, sent me a distress signal 28 minutes ago. The officer squinted at the bright screen. It showed a single text message from a contact labeled Grandma Ruby. The message read simply, "The bluebird needs a cage." My mother scoffed loudly, crossing her arms. "A bluebird," she mocked, shaking her head. "You brought the police to my home in the middle of the night over a text message about a bird. See, officers, I told you she is completely delusional." I ignored my mother entirely, keeping my eyes locked on the police. "My grandmother and I established this secret phrase over 10 years ago," I explained calmly, maintaining absolute professional composure despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "She knows to use it strictly if she is in immediate physical or financial danger and cannot safely make a phone call. She is a wealthy woman living under their care and she is in trouble. I demand a welfare check right now." The commotion at the door finally drew the rest of the household. Footsteps echoed heavily on the marble floors of the grand foyer. My father Warren emerged from the hallway, tying the belt of his velvet robe, his face flushed with anger at the disruption of his peaceful evening. Right beside him was my older sister Maya. Maya was the undisputed golden child of our family. She had done everything perfectly, according to my parents: strict social script, joining the right sorority, marrying the right man, and maintaining a flawless aesthetic that my mother endlessly bragged about. Maya leaned against the sweeping staircase railing, looking me up and down with a sneer that perfectly mirrored our mother. "Kiara, really? Maya drawled, her tone thick with condescension. Did your little freelance bookkeeping gig finally go under? Are you that desperate for cash that you have to fabricate a hostage situation just to get into the house? I clenched my jaw. Freelance bookkeeping gig. That was what they proudly told themselves I did. When I left college early to pursue specialized forensic certifications that my father deemed beneath his elite standards, they cut me off entirely. I spent my 20s living in tiny apartments, eating cheap noodles, and building my life from the ground up while they enthusiastically funded Maya's lavish lifestyle. They loved the narrative of me as the broken, struggling outsider because it made them feel superior. They assumed my modest clothes and quiet lifestyle meant I was failing. They had absolutely no idea what I actually did for a living, and tonight was not the time to give them a resume update. "Where is Grandma Ruby?" I demanded, projecting my voice so it bounced off their high vaulted ceilings. "I want to see her right now." Warren puffed out his chest, stepping in front of his precious golden daughter. "You have no right to come here making demands, Kiara. Your grandmother is resting comfortably in the guest wing. We take exceptional care of her, which is more than you can say. You have not been to a family dinner in months. You isolated yourself from this family." "I isolate myself because this family is a toxic swamp of image obsession and greed," I shot back, refusing to back down. "But I talk to Grandma every single day. And today she sent the code. Bring her out here. Let the officers see her with their own eyes." The tension in the foyer was suddenly interrupted by a slow, arrogant clapping. Stepping out from the shadows of the formal living room was Trent, my sister's husband. Trent was a wealthy white real estate developer from a prominent legacy family, and my parents treated him like absolute royalty. He was the prize they paraded around to prove they had truly arrived in the upper echelons of society. Trent strolled toward the door with an insufferable smirk on his face, a glass of expensive bourbon resting casually in his hand. "Well, well, if it is not the prodigal sister," Trent said, chuckling, as he stepped directly into my personal space, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. He turned his attention to the police officers, adopting a smooth, fraternal tone, offering them an easy out. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry my sister-in-law dragged you out here. The truth is old Ruby has been slipping lately. Her dementia is acting up again. She probably just misplaced her phone or got confused by a television show. You know how the elderly get when their minds start to go. It is a tragedy, really." I felt a surge of pure fury coursing through my blood. "Grandma Ruby does not have dementia," I snapped, stepping closer to Trent, so he knew I was not intimidated in the slightest. "She beat me at chess 2 days ago. She manages her own stock portfolio with razor-sharp precision. Do not stand there and lie to the police." The older officer sighed clearly, wanting to avoid a domestic dispute among wealthy citizens who could cause massive trouble for his department. "Ma'am," he said, turning to me with a sympathetic but firm look, "unless we have evidence of a struggle, a forced entry, or signs of immediate distress, we cannot force our way into the home to wake an elderly woman based on a cryptic text message about a bird. Your family says she is asleep. We have to respect their privacy and their property rights." "She sent a distress code," I argued, my voice rising with urgent frustration. "That is evidence of distress. You cannot just leave her in there alone with them." But my mother had already sensed her victory. Cynthia crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "You heard the officers, Kiara. You have no legal standing here. You are nothing but a nuisance to this family. Now get off our property before we have you arrested for trespassing." The officers tipped their hats apologetically and began to back away down the stone steps, advising me that this was a civil matter that I needed to handle through the proper legal channels during regular business hours. As they walked down the long driveway toward their cruiser, the balance of power on the porch shifted immediately. The polite, concerned citizen masks my family wore vanished entirely, revealing the cruel, calculated faces beneath. Trent leaned out the door, his bourbon sloshing dangerously in his crystal glass. He dropped his voice so only I could hear the venom dripping from his words. "Crawl back to the slums before you get hurt, Kiara. You do not belong in this world, and you certainly do not have the power to challenge us. Go play your little bookkeeping games and leave the real money to the adults." I stood my ground on the welcome mat, my mind racing frantically for a way past them. I knew Grandma Ruby was inside and I knew she was terrified. But just before Maya reached forward to slam the heavy double doors in my face, something caught my eye. My vision darted past Trent's broad shoulder to the ornate console table in the grand entryway. Resting next to a decorative crystal vase was a thick manila folder. It was slightly open, and from where I stood bathed in the porch light, I could clearly read the bold, stark heading printed on the top document. It read, Irrevocable Power of Attorney Ruby Washington. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut with a resounding thud, the deadbolt clicking into place like a gunshot in the quiet night. I stood alone in the humid air, the pieces of the twisted puzzle rapidly clicking together in my mind. They had not just isolated my grandmother, they were legally trapping her. They thought they had won. They thought they had easily dismissed the useless broke daughter they had spent a decade and a half mocking and tearing down. But as I walked back to my car, a cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. They had absolutely no idea who they had just locked out. The heavy thud of expensive leather loafers echoing against the imported marble floor broke the tense silence. My father Warren marched into the grand foyer, tightly securing the belt of his velvet robe. His jaw was clenched, his eyes darting frantically toward the open doorway, as if the entire neighborhood of wealthy Atlanta socialites was already gathered on the lawn to witness this humiliation. Right beside him, descending the sweeping curved staircase, like she was making a red carpet debut, was my older sister Maya. Maya was the undisputed golden child of our family. Even at this hour, her hair was perfectly laid. Her silk pajamas looked custom-tailored, and her expression was molded into a mask of pure condescension. She had followed my parents' exact social script for African-American elite society. She joined the right sorority, attended the right charity galas, and married a wealthy white real estate developer to secure her spot at the top of the social ladder. "What in the world is going on here?" my father demanded, his booming voice designed to intimidate. He pointed a thick finger at me. "Kiara, you have exactly 10 seconds to explain why there are two police officers standing on my front porch. Do you have any idea what this looks like? I sit on the board of the Atlanta Commerce Club. If the neighbors see this, the rumors will never stop." I did not flinch. "Your reputation is not my concern, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice loud enough for the officers to hear. "I am here for Grandma Ruby. She sent me an emergency distress code. I want to see her, and I want to see her right now." Maya let out a sharp, mocking laugh as she reached the bottom of the stairs. She crossed her arms, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "A distress code," Maya sneered. "Are you completely out of your mind? Or did your little freelance bookkeeping gig finally go under? Is that what this is? Are you so desperate for cash that you have to fabricate some ridiculous hostage situation just to extort money from us?" The sheer venom in her voice was nothing new. For 15 years, this was the exact dynamic we operated under. When I was 18, I rejected their suffocating image-obsessed world. I refused to let my mother parade me around to high society luncheons to find a suitable, wealthy husband. When I left college early to pursue specialized financial forensic certifications that my father deemed beneath his elite standards, they cut me off entirely. I spent my 20s living in tiny apartments, eating cheap noodles and building my life from the ground up, while they enthusiastically funded Maya's lavish lifestyle. They loved the narrative of me as the broken, struggling outsider because it made them feel superior. They assumed my modest, tailored clothes and quiet lifestyle meant I was failing. They branded me a useless dropout. They had absolutely no idea what I actually did for a living, and tonight was not the time to give them a resume update. "I am not here for a handout, Maya," I said, taking a step forward. "I talk to Grandma every single day. We have an established protocol. If she sends that specific phrase, it means she is in immediate danger. Bring her out here. Let the officers see her with their own eyes. If she is perfectly fine, I will walk away." My father scoffed, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "You isolate yourself from this family for years, you refuse to participate in our lives, and now you show up demanding to search my house. Absolutely not. Your grandmother is resting comfortably in the guest wing. We take exceptional care of her, which is more than you can say. You have not contributed a single dime to her medical care. Because she does not need my dimes." I shot back, my voice laced with steel. She has a $4 million estate that she manages herself. Before my father could respond, a slow, arrogant clapping echoed from the shadows of the formal living room. Trent Maya's husband strolled into the foyer. Trent was a man who moved through the world with the untouchable arrogance of old money and unchecked privilege. My parents treated him like absolute royalty, the ultimate prize they paraded around to prove they had truly arrived. He wore a crisp dress shirt and slacks even at this hour, a glass of expensive bourbon resting casually in his right hand. "Well, well, if it is not the prodigal sister, Trent," said a smug, patronizing smile plastered across his face. He did not stop walking until he stepped directly into my personal space, attempting to use his height and broad shoulders to physically intimidate me. He stood so close I could smell the sharp, expensive cologne masking the alcohol on his breath. He turned his attention away from me and looked directly at the two police officers, his entire demeanor shifting. The aggressive posture melted into a smooth, fraternal charm. He offered them an easy, conspiratorial smile, leveraging his privilege to instantly disarm the tension. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry. My sister-in-law dragged you out here tonight," Trent said, his tone thick with fake apology. "I am Trent Sterling. You might know my development firm, Sterling Real Estate. We work closely with the city. Look, the truth is old. Ruby has been slipping lately. Her dementia is acting up again. She probably just misplaced her phone or got confused by a television show. You know how the elderly get when their minds start to go. It is a tragedy, really, but my wife and her parents are doing everything they can to keep her comfortable." I felt a surge of pure, blinding fury coursing through my blood. I refused to let him control the narrative. "Grandma Ruby does not have dementia," I snapped, stepping closer to Trent, so he knew I was not intimidated in the slightest. "She beat me at chess 2 days ago. She manages her own stock portfolio with razor-sharp precision. Do not stand there and lie to the police." Trent chuckled, shaking his head as if I were a petulant child throwing a tantrum. "Kiara, honey, you need to go home. You are embarrassing yourself. It is sad, really. You show up here looking frantic, demanding to see an 82-year-old woman in the middle of the night. You are clearly not well." He looked back at the officers, leaning in, slightly lowering his voice as if sharing a secret among men. "She has always struggled, officers. The family has tried to help her, but she refuses therapy. She just wants access to the old woman's bank accounts. We had to change the locks last year to keep her from stealing." "That is an absolute lie." I fired back, my voice remaining loud, clear, and authoritative. "Officers, this man is intentionally misleading you. My grandmother sent a distress signal. I have a legal right to request a wellness check, and you have a duty to perform one. I do not care how many country clubs this man belongs to or how big this house is. Elderly abuse happens behind mahogany doors just as often as it happens anywhere else." My mother gasped, clutching the lapels of her silk robe as if she might faint from the sheer scandal of my words. "How dare you accuse us of such a vile thing? Warren, do something. Tell them to arrest her." My father puffed out his chest, stepping beside Trent to present a united, wealthy front against the troublesome outsider. "Officers, my family is highly respected in Atlanta. We host charity events for the Police Benevolent Fund. This woman is a disgruntled, estranged family member trying to cause a scene because we stopped paying her bills. If you do not remove her from my property immediately, I will be making a phone call to the chief of police." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing between my furious, well-dressed family and me. The older officer, clearly wanting to avoid a complicated domestic dispute involving wealthy citizens who could cause massive trouble for his department, let out a heavy sigh. Trent seized the moment of hesitation. He took a sip of his bourbon and smiled reassuringly at the cops. "We appreciate you coming out, guys, we really do. But as you can see, everything is fine here. The house is quiet, the alarms are off, the old bird is fast asleep in her bed. No harm, no foul, just a family misunderstanding. I will make sure my sister-in-law gets back to her apartment safely." I held my ground on the welcome mat, my mind racing frantically. I knew Grandma Ruby was inside, and I knew she was terrified. The way Trent spoke about her, calling her the old bird, the way my parents refused to simply go wake her up to prove me wrong, it all screamed of guilt. They were hiding something massive, and they were using every ounce of their social capital to build a wall around it. I looked at the older officer, silently pleading with him to see through their polished veneer. Please, I said, my voice dropping its combative edge, replacing it with raw, urgent sincerity. Just 5 minutes. Walk inside, see her face, ask her if she sent the message. If she says it was a mistake, I will leave and never come back. But if you walk away now and something happens to her, it will be on your conscience. Trent's smile tightened, the muscles in his jaw ticking. He stepped so close to me that his pristine dress shoe bumped against my boot. You are pushing your luck, Kiara, he murmured, his voice dropping so low the officers could not hear. You are playing a game you cannot afford to lose. Now take your little phone and get off my property before I make sure you never work in this city again. The older officer took a slow, deliberate step back, adjusting the heavy duty belt at his waist. He looked at me, his eyes betraying a flicker of genuine sympathy that was instantly swallowed by bureaucratic resignation. I knew that look. It was the look of a man who was bound by the rigid constraints of the law, a man who knew something felt wrong but lacked the legal authority to do a single thing about it. Ma'am, the officer began, his voice taking on that practiced, measured tone reserved for de-escalation. Mr. Sterling is right. We do not have a warrant. We do not have any audible sounds of a struggle, and there are no signs of forced entry. Your family has confirmed that the homeowner is safely asleep in her bed. I understand you are concerned about a text message, but without concrete proof of immediate physical danger, our hands are tied. But the distress code is proof. I pleaded, my voice tight with a desperate mounting panic that I fought to suppress. You do not understand the dynamic in this house. She would never send that phrase unless they were hurting her. Please just walk down the hall. Just knock on her door. It will take exactly 2 minutes. The younger officer shook his head, gesturing toward the sprawling, impeccably decorated foyer behind my parents. We cannot force our way into a private residence to wake an elderly woman just because you have a disagreement with your parents. This is a civil matter. If you believe she is being neglected, you need to call Adult Protective Services during regular business hours. We have to leave the premises now. My chest constricted, the humid Georgia night air suddenly feeling too thick to breathe. I knew the law. I ran a corporate fraud investigation firm that navigated the razor-thin edge of civil and federal statutes every single day. I knew exactly what probable cause required. But standing on this pristine, sweeping front porch, I was not a high-powered CEO. I was just a granddaughter terrified for the only woman in this family who had ever shown me unconditional love. My mother, Cynthia, let out a dramatic theatrical sigh of relief. She pulled her silk designer robe tighter around her slender frame, projecting the perfect image of a weary, long-suffering matriarch. Thank you, officers, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I apologize again that my daughter wasted your valuable time and taxpayer dollars. It is an absolute tragedy when a child refuses to get the psychiatric help they so desperately need. We will be contacting our attorneys in the morning to file a restraining order. She is clearly a danger to herself and to our peaceful home. My father, Warren, stepped forward, his broad shoulders squared as he nodded approvingly at the police. Have a safe night on patrol, gentlemen. I will be sure to mention your professionalism to the chief at the next Commerce Club gala. They were putting on a masterclass in gaslighting, and the officers bought every single second of it. The police tipped their hats respectfully, turning their backs on me and walking down the wide, curved stone steps. I stood paralyzed on the welcome mat, listening to the heavy crunch of their boots against the gravel driveway. The flashing red and blue lights of their cruiser bathed the front of the estate in a harsh, pulsing glow before the engine roared to life. I watched the taillights recede down the long, oak-lined driveway, the massive wrought iron gates of the property slowly swinging shut behind them with a heavy metallic clang. The moment the police car disappeared from sight, the atmosphere on the porch shifted with terrifying speed. The polite, concerned citizen masks my family wore evaporated into the humid air, revealing the cold, calculated cruelty beneath. Maya leaned against the doorframe, her flawless acrylic nails tapping a sharp, mocking rhythm against the mahogany wood. You really thought you did something there, did you not, Kiara? She sneered, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. You thought you could just march up to our estate in your cheap boots and play the hero. It is pathetic. Grandma does not even want to see you. She told us yesterday she is entirely sick of your constant begging. She is ashamed of what you have become. You are a liar, Maya, I shot back, my voice vibrating with raw anger. Grandma knows exactly who I am. She knows I do not need a dime from any of you. My father scoffed, a harsh booming sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the foyer. Stop lying to yourself, Kiara. You have been a failure since the day you dropped out of university and turned your back on the opportunities I provided. You are an embarrassment to my name. Do not ever return to this property. If I see your face on my driveway again, I will not call the police. I will have my private security drag you off by your hair. Trent stepped smoothly in front of my father, holding up a hand as if he were the true master of the house. The arrogant white developer asserting his dominance over his black in-laws' property was a dynamic that always made my stomach turn, but my parents welcomed it, blinded by his wealth and legacy status. Trent took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon, the ice clinking softly against the crystal glass. He leaned in, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. The smug, charming facade he had used on the police was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, predatory stare. He leaned his head down, placing his lips just inches from my ear. "Crawl back to the slums before you get hurt," he whispered, his voice dropping into a chilling, venomous register. "You have no idea what is happening here, and you have absolutely no power to stop it. Go play your little bookkeeping games and leave the real money to the adults. If you cross me, I will crush you so thoroughly you will not even be able to afford the bus fare out of Atlanta." He pulled back, his lips curling into a triumphant, terrifying smile. He gave me a dismissive little wave, turning on his heel to walk back into the lavish living room, completely unbothered by my presence. Maya stepped forward to finish the job, her hand gripping the heavy brass handle of the front door. "Goodbye, Kiara," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Try to get your life together. It really is sad watching you spiral like this." She began to push the massive mahogany door shut. But in that final agonizing second, as the gap between the door and the frame narrowed, my eyes darted past her perfectly styled hair. The grand crystal chandelier in the foyer illuminated the space with brilliant, blinding light. There, resting carelessly on the gilded marble console table, just feet away from the entrance, was a thick manila folder. It was slightly ajar, bursting with official legal documents. My eyes, trained by years of grueling forensic financial investigations, instinctively locked onto the bold, stark black font printed across the top of the visible page. It was a split-second glimpse, a fleeting fraction of a moment before the wood blocked my view completely. But the words burned themselves into my retinas, setting off a blaring, catastrophic alarm in my mind. "Irrevocable power of attorney, Ruby Washington." The heavy door slammed shut with a thunderous boom. The deadbolt clicked into place, locking me out in the sweltering Georgia night. I stood entirely still on the front porch, my breath catching in my throat as the magnitude of what I had just seen washed over me like a tidal wave of ice water. They had not just isolated my grandmother. They had not just locked her away in the guest wing to prevent me from seeing her. They were executing a hostile financial takeover. An irrevocable power of attorney meant they had total, unchecked, absolute control over every single asset, bank account, and property attached to her name. It meant they could liquidate her $4 million estate without her consent, without a judge, and without any oversight. Trent's chilling threat echoed in my mind. Leave the real money to the adults. My family thought they had won. They thought they had successfully swatted away the annoying, broke, useless daughter who was too weak and too poor to fight back against their high-powered attorneys and elite social connections. They went to sleep that night believing their dark, twisted secrets were perfectly safe behind their gated walls and private security systems. They had absolutely no idea that the woman they just locked out was not a struggling bookkeeper. As I turned on my heel and walked back to my car, a cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. They wanted a war over Grandma Ruby's money. They were about to get a total, devastating financial annihilation. I walked down the sweeping, aggregate driveway, leaving the oppressive shadow of my parents' estate behind. Trent had told me to crawl back to the slums, assuming I was heading toward a rusted-out sedan or the nearest bus stop. Instead, I bypassed the guest parking and pressed my thumb against the biometric sensor of my matte black Porsche Panamera. The engine roared to life with a low, menacing growl that cut through the quiet, gated neighborhood. I slid into the driver's seat, synced my phone to the dashboard, and immediately dialed my chief operating officer. The digital clock read 1 in the morning, but in my line of work, financial bleeding did not operate on a 9 to 5 schedule. Jamal answered on the second ring, his voice razor sharp and wide awake. I need the Alpha team in the war room immediately, I told him, as I accelerated out of the prestigious zip code. We have a hostile asset takeover in progress. The target is personal. Pull every public filing tax record and property deed attached to Ruby Washington. They are using an irrevocable power of attorney to liquidate her estate, and I want every single transaction mapped out before the sun comes up. I did not need to explain further. Jamal and I had built our firm from the ground up, turning a two-person operation into the most feared corporate fraud investigation agency in the Southeast. While my parents and Maya spent the last decade and a half mocking my freelance bookkeeping gig, they were entirely oblivious to the reality of my life. I was not doing payroll for local barbershops. I was the founder and CEO of Vanguard Forensic Intelligence. My firm contracted directly with the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and top-tier private equity firms to hunt down embezzlers, dismantle shell companies, and expose multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. My parents desperately worshipped the Atlanta business elite, completely unaware that I was the phantom predator the elite hired when their money went missing. 20 minutes later, I strode through the glass double doors of my headquarters, occupying the entire top floor of a downtown Atlanta high-rise. The panoramic views of the city skyline sparkled beneath us, but I did not spare them a glance. I walked straight into the central glass-walled conference room, where Jamal and 3 of my top forensic accountants were already hammering away at their keyboards. Massive digital monitors illuminated the room, rapidly populating with banking webs, routing numbers, and property deeds. "What do we have so far?" I asked, tossing my keys onto the polished glass table and rolling up my sleeves. Jamal pulled up a master timeline on the main screen. "It is a bloodbath, Kiara. We accessed the county clerk registry. A power of attorney was quietly filed exactly 6 months ago. The signatures look authentic at first glance, but the notary stamp belongs to a private lawyer who shares an office building with Trent Sterling's real estate development group. That is no coincidence." "Put Grandma Ruby's portfolio on the screen," I commanded, feeling a cold, clinical detachment settle over me. This was how I operated. Emotion clouded judgment, and right now I needed pure, unadulterated facts to execute my counterstrike. The screen shifted to a detailed breakdown of my grandmother's lifelong savings. Grandma Ruby was a brilliant woman who had spent 40 years buying and holding prime commercial real estate across Georgia, alongside a rock-solid portfolio of blue-chip stocks. Her total net worth had always hovered right around $4 million. She lived frugally, saving every penny, so she would never have to depend on anyone. Now, staring at the digitized financial trail, my stomach twisted into a painful knot. "They have been bleeding her dry," Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave as he highlighted a series of massive withdrawals. "It started slow, just a few thousand here and there, disguised as medical expenses and estate management fees. But over the last 90 days, the velocity skyrocketed. They completely liquidated her mutual funds. They took out a maximum capacity reverse mortgage on her primary residence, pulling out nearly $800,000 in raw cash." "Where is the money going?" I demanded, my eyes scanning the chaotic web of wire transfers. A younger analyst named David tapped his keyboard, projecting a new set of data. "They are using a technique called layering. They break the large sums into smaller, less conspicuous increments and funnel them through a series of intermediary accounts. But they are getting sloppy. We traced $300,000 moving from your grandmother's primary checking account directly into a high-yield trust. And that trust is solely registered to your sister." "Maya," I whispered, the sheer audacity of her greed making my blood boil. While she was standing on that porch acting like a concerned, devoted granddaughter, she was actively siphoning away the money Grandma Ruby had spent a lifetime building. David pulled up another transaction. "It gets worse. 2 days ago, another $500,000 was wired out. The destination account belongs to a luxury automotive dealership, and a high-end interior design firm in Buckhead. They were not just stealing her money to cover debts. They were using my grandmother's life savings as a personal slush fund to finance their extravagant high society lifestyle. My parents were throwing their lavish charity galas, and Maya was buying imported Italian furniture, all paid for with the stolen security of an 82-year-old woman. My mother had the nerve to call me a failure seeking handouts, while she was actively robbing her own mother to pay for designer silk robes and country club dues. The rage I felt was no longer hot and chaotic. It was freezing cold and perfectly focused. I had spent 15 years absorbing their insults, watching them elevate Trent and Maya to an untouchable pedestal of perfection. They believed they were the smartest people in every room they walked into. But looking at the digital evidence displayed across my monitors, I realized they were nothing but common thieves wrapped in expensive fabric. They had left a financial fingerprint a mile wide, assuming no one would ever have the authority or the intelligence to look for it. Jamal leaned back in his ergonomic chair, crossing his arms. We can freeze the remaining liquid assets, but we need legal authority. Since Trent has a registered power of attorney, any administrative hold we place through our banking contacts will only be temporary. We have 48 hours at best before his lawyers challenge the freeze and release the funds. Then we do not just freeze the accounts, I said, my voice dangerously calm. We destroy the illusion they are using to justify the theft. They think they can hide behind their social status. I want every single transaction mapped out down to the very last cent. I want to know exactly what Trent is doing with his share of the money, because a man with his supposed generational wealth does not need to steal from an elderly woman unless he is hiding a massive, catastrophic financial hole. I turned to the main monitor, my eyes locking onto the most recent transaction, time-stamped just 4 hours ago. It was a transfer of $50,000 directly into Maya's personal checking account. Jamal caught my gaze and pulled up Maya's current credit card activity linked to that same account. She is not sitting at home worrying about Grandma Ruby, he said, shaking his head. She is actively spending it right now. We have live pings on her platinum card. She just authorized a private shopping experience at a high-end boutique in Buckhead. She is sipping champagne and buying designer bags with stolen money. I grabbed my keys off the glass table, the metal chiming sharply in the quiet room. Keep digging into Trent's real estate firm, I ordered, turning toward the door. Tear his corporate filings apart. Find out what he is so desperate to finance. Where are you going? Jamal asked, already turning back to his multi-monitor setup. I adjusted the collar of my blazer, my reflection catching in the glass walls of my empire. I am going to pay my sister a visit, I said. It is time to let the golden child know that her credit limit has officially been reached. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt agonizingly slow. My mind was a whirlwind of calculations and legal statutes. For years, I had maintained a strict boundary between my professional life and my toxic family. I had endured their holiday dinners, where they openly mocked my supposed poverty. I had sat silently while my father bragged about Trent's brilliant business acumen and Maya's flawless taste. I had swallowed my pride because engaging with their delusions was a waste of my energy. But this was different. This was not about protecting my pride. This was about protecting Grandma Ruby, the woman who had secretly slipped me cash when my parents cut off my college tuition. The woman who told me to trust my instincts when everyone else called me a failure. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I stepped back into my car, the leather seat cold against my back. The Atlanta sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale, bruised light over the city skyline. Maya thought she was untouchable. She believed the protective bubble of her husband's wealth and our parents' social standing insulated her from any real-world consequences. She was about to learn that in the world of financial forensics, there is nowhere to hide. Every dollar leaves a shadow, and I was the person holding the flashlight. I merged onto the highway, heading straight for the upscale shopping district of Buckhead. The transition from the helpless scapegoat on the porch to the predator tracking her prey was complete. My sister was about to have the most expensive, humiliating morning of her perfectly curated life. The valet at the luxury Buckhead shopping pavilion rushed forward to open the door of my Porsche, but I was already stepping out onto the pristine pavement. I tossed him the keys without breaking my stride. The heavy glass doors of the exclusive designer boutique parted before me. Inside, the air smelled of white lilies and aggressively expensive leather. The lighting was meticulously designed to make the imported Italian marble floors shine like glass. It was the exact kind of high society playground my parents worshipped and I despised. I did not have to search long to find my target. Maya was holding court in the private VIP lounge at the back of the store. She was surrounded by three of her most pretentious socialite friends, women who spent their days organizing charity galas and spending their husbands' money. They were lounging on velvet sofas sipping complimentary champagne while a personal shopper displayed a row of five-figure handbags on a mirrored table. Maya was holding a pale pink crocodile skin purse, admiring her reflection in a gilded mirror. Her laughter echoed through the quiet boutique, sharp and practiced. I walked straight past the horrified sales associate who tried to intercept me. I pushed through the velvet rope separating the VIP section from the rest of the store. The heavy thud of my boots against the marble floor made all four women turn their heads. Maya lowered the pink handbag, her flawless smile instantly hardening into a mask of pure irritation. Kiara, she snapped, her tone dripping with secondhand embarrassment. How did you even get past security? You cannot just wander in here wearing a business suit looking like you are about to audit the building. This is a private shopping appointment. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout. I stepped directly into the center of their circle, ignoring the disgusted gasps of her friends. I see that $50,000 wire transfer cleared your personal checking account this morning. Maya, I said, my voice slicing through the thick silence of the room. Tell me, does this boutique accept stolen funds directly from an 82-year-old woman's life savings, or did you have to launder the cash through Trent's real estate firm first to buy that purse? The three socialites gasped in unison, exchanging horrified glances. One of them nearly spilled her champagne. Maya froze, but only for a fraction of a second. A normal person caught red-handed, committing a federal financial crime would panic. A normal person would drag me out of the room to beg for silence. But Maya was completely insulated by a lifetime of unchecked arrogance and my parents' constant validation. She simply handed the purse back to the personal shopper and took a calm, deliberate sip of her champagne. She looked at her friends and let out a long, dramatic sigh. I am so sorry, ladies, Maya said, shaking her head with an expertly crafted expression of deep pity. This is my estranged sister Kiara. As I have mentioned before, she has struggled with severe mental health issues since she dropped out of college. She fixates on our family finances because she refuses to get a real job. It is a tragic delusion. You forged an irrevocable power of attorney. Maya, I stated, maintaining eye contact while her friends shifted uncomfortably on the velvet sofas. You and Trent pulled nearly $800,000 out of Grandma Ruby's reverse mortgage. You liquidated her mutual funds. You are actively bleeding a vulnerable elderly woman dry so you can sit here and drink free champagne. Maya stood up, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from her tailored silk trousers. She stepped close to me, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing aggressively into the air between us. Since you are so obsessively calculating our family assets with your little bookkeeping calculator, let me educate you. She hissed, her voice low and vicious. Grandma Ruby is 82 years old. Her money was sitting completely stagnant in outdated mutual funds, doing absolutely nothing for this family. She refuses to upgrade her lifestyle. She embarrasses us by living like a peasant when she has millions. I stared at her, completely repulsed by the sheer entitlement radiating from her pores. You stole her money because you think she does not spend it fast enough, I asked. We did not steal anything. Maya countered, her chin tilting upward in arrogant defiance. Trent is building a massive state-of-the-art luxury commercial plaza in Midtown. It is a legacy project. We are simply reallocating stagnant family assets to guarantee a higher yield. We are securing generational wealth. Trent needed liquidity to finalize the zoning permits and Grandma provided it. It is called a strategic family investment. Something you would understand if you had actually finished your degree instead of playing rebel all your life. You are a fool, Maya, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm whisper. That is not a strategic investment. That is federal wire fraud. It is elder abuse. And the fact that you think you can dress it up in country club terminology shows exactly how easily your husband manipulated you into doing his dirty work. Maya laughed right in my face, a harsh booming sound that echoed off the mirrored walls. Fraud, she mocked. My husband is Trent Sterling. His family practically built this city. He employs a team of corporate lawyers who charge more per hour than your entire apartment is worth. We have the legal paperwork. The notary stamped it. My parents approved it. We have the power and the capital. Do you honestly think a judge or a bank manager is going to listen to a broke, disgruntled college dropout over the Sterling family? She took a step back, spreading her arms wide as if to showcase her untouchable superiority. You are a nobody, Kiara. You have absolutely zero leverage here. If you try to take this to the police, Trent's lawyers will bury you so deep in defamation lawsuits you will be paying us for the rest of your pathetic life. Now turn around, walk out of this store, and go back to your miserable little existence before I call the police and have you arrested for harassment. I looked at Maya, taking in the desperate defensive posture hiding just beneath her expensive clothes. She firmly believed Trent was a brilliant developer securing their future. She believed the white wealth and legacy status he brought to their marriage made them legally invincible. But my mind was already racing miles ahead of her shallow insults. If Trent Sterling possessed the massive generational wealth he projected, he would never need to steal cash from his elderly black grandmother-in-law to fund a commercial real estate permit. Wealthy developers used bank loans, leverage, and private equity groups. They did not forge documents to drain an old woman's reverse mortgage unless they were completely cut off from legitimate financial institutions. You are right about one thing, Maya, I said softly, offering her a cold, razor-sharp smile. Trent's lawyers are very expensive. I hope he saved enough of Grandma's money to pay them. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the luxury boutique. Her arrogant laughter resumed behind me as she tried to soothe her shaken friends, but I tuned it out completely. Maya had just handed me the missing piece of the puzzle. Trent was not building a legacy project. He was plugging a catastrophic hole in a sinking ship. I pulled my phone from my pocket the moment I crossed the threshold into the humid Atlanta air. I hit the speed dial for my lead analyst. Trent Sterling is not expanding his empire, I said into the receiver. He is drowning in hidden debt and his real estate venture is a shell company. Find it. The drive back to Vanguard Forensic Intelligence took less than 15 minutes, but my mind was moving at light speed. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of my headquarters and strode directly into the central war room. Jamal was already standing by the primary digital display, with his arms crossed and a grim expression on his face. David and the rest of the analytical team were typing furiously, surrounded by empty coffee cups and stacks of printed financial ledgers. I did not even bother sitting down. "What did you find?" I asked, tossing my blazer onto the back of a leather chair. Jamal tapped a key and the massive screen illuminated with a complex web of corporate filings, bank transfers, and property deeds. "You hit the nail right on the head, Kiara. Trent Sterling is a ghost. He walks around Atlanta wrapped in his family legacy, but on paper the man is bleeding out." Jamal zoomed in on a cluster of documents labeled Sterling Real Estate Development. He explained that Trent's entire business was a sophisticated house of cards. The company possessed a gorgeous website featuring sleek glass towers and press releases about urban revitalization, but that was where the reality ended. I scanned the municipal zoning records displayed on the left side of the screen. The midtown luxury commercial plaza that Maya had just bragged about at the boutique did not exist. The city had rejected the initial permit applications 8 months ago due to unpaid contractor liens and severe environmental code violations on the proposed site. Trent was not building a legacy project. He was running a shell game. David chimed in, pulling up a secondary spreadsheet tracking the flow of capital. We traced the $800,000 they extracted from Grandma Ruby's reverse mortgage. It never went to any construction escrow account. Instead, the funds were wired to a holding company in Delaware. From there, the money was split into 4 smaller transfers and deposited directly into the accounts of a private equity syndicate notorious for issuing predatory high-interest bridge loans. I stared at the screen, feeling the cold, clinical reality of the data wash over me. Trent was not a brilliant developer securing generational wealth. His family money had clearly dried up years ago, leaving him with nothing but a recognizable white legacy name and an appetite for aggressive high-risk investments that blew up in his face. He was currently underwater by at least $6 million. The syndicate he borrowed from was calling in his debts, and the aggressive restructuring of his loans meant he needed massive injections of liquid cash just to keep his knees from being broken. But Trent could not have orchestrated this alone. An irrevocable power of attorney required intimate access to Grandma Ruby's personal identification, her medical history, and her physical presence to lower the guard of any notary. He needed inside help. He needed someone Grandma trusted explicitly. Pull up Warren and Cynthia's financial profiles for the last 2 years. I ordered, my voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. I want to see exactly what my parents have been hiding behind their perfect country club smiles. Jamal hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying. You are not going to like this, Kiara. The screen shifted, displaying my parents' joint banking accounts and investment portfolios. The numbers plummeted in a steep, terrifying red line. My father's supposedly untouchable stock portfolio had been decimated by a series of disastrous margin calls 18 months ago. They were heavily leveraged on the sprawling Buckhead estate and were quietly facing pre-foreclosure on 2 other investment properties. But the most damning evidence was tucked inside my mother's social ledgers. Cynthia had publicly pledged $200,000 to the Atlanta Symphony Gala and committed another $50,000 to the Historical Preservation Society. She had absolutely no way to pay those pledges. In the hyper-competitive, image-obsessed world of the African American elite, failing to honor a high-profile charity pledge was social suicide. If they defaulted, they would be instantly excommunicated from the very circles they had sacrificed their entire lives to infiltrate. The picture was suddenly sickeningly clear. Trent approached my parents with a devil's bargain. He needed immediate, untraceable liquid cash to fend off his private equity creditors. My parents needed an immediate cash injection to save their estate and maintain their flawless high society facade. Grandma Ruby, with her $4 million estate and frugal lifestyle, was the perfect mark for their combined desperation. David highlighted a series of recurring monthly deposits flowing from Trent's Delaware shell company directly into my father's primary checking account. They authorized the power of attorney, handing Trent the legal keys to the kingdom. I said, piecing the conspiracy together aloud. In return, Trent laundered a portion of Grandma's stolen money back to my parents, disguising the transactions as commercial consulting fees. They sold out their own mother to keep their names on a charity brochure. They handed over an 82-year-old woman to a desperate drowning man just so they could keep pretending they were royalty. The sheer depravity of the betrayal knocked the breath out of my lungs. For 15 years, my parents had looked down on me, treating me like a useless failure because I refused to play their pretentious games. They branded me a disgrace to the family name, while they were secretly committing federal wire fraud and elder abuse to fund their own delusions of grandeur. Jamal placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me in the present moment. We have the proof, Kiara. The paper trail is solid. But Trent still has the legal authority on paper. He knows we are looking now. Maya is arrogant, but she is not stupid. She will call him the second she leaves that boutique to complain about your confrontation. He will realize his shell companies are exposed. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was just past noon. Trent thought he had time. He thought his expensive lawyers and his legacy name made him invincible against a woman he deemed a broke college dropout. He had absolutely no idea that I held the exact coordinates of his financial destruction in the palm of my hand. Where is he right now? I asked, turning away from the monitors and grabbing my car keys from the glass table. David typed rapidly, running a trace on the burner phone associated with Trent's holding company. He is checked in at the Piedmont Elite Country Club. He has a tea time scheduled with 2 local politicians. He is out there playing golf, pretending he is the master of the universe. Not for much longer, I said, slipping my phone into my pocket. The strategy was simple, but required absolute precision. I could not just hand this over to the authorities yet, because the forged power of attorney would tie the funds up in probate court for years, leaving Grandma Ruby completely vulnerable and without resources. I needed to corner Trent. I needed to look him in the eye and let him know that I was holding the match to his paper empire. I needed to force him into making a panicked, desperate mistake that would trigger an automatic federal freeze on his accounts without my direct intervention. Keep monitoring his offshore routing numbers, I told Jamal as I walked toward the glass doors of the war room. Have the federal intercept protocols ready to deploy on my signal. I stepped into the private elevator, the polished steel doors closing silently out the noise of the busy office. Trent Sterling thought he could threaten me on my parents' front porch and tell me to crawl back to the slums. He thought he could steal from the woman who raised me and face zero consequences because of the color of his skin and the balance of his bank account. I was going to walk straight into his exclusive country club, shatter his fragile reality, and watch him drown in his own greed. I pulled my sleek black Porsche into the sprawling circular driveway of the Piedmont Elite Country Club. The valet rushed forward, eager to open my door, but I ignored him entirely, parking the car myself, right in the middle of the reserved VIP loading zone. This place was an absolute bastion of old Southern money. It was a fortress of white privilege, where men like Trent Sterling conducted their shady business over 18 holes of golf and $100 glasses of imported scotch. My parents had spent 2 full decades kissing up to the board members just to get an invitation to the annual gala. They treated this very building like a holy sanctuary of success. To me, it was nothing more than a crime scene waiting to be processed. I bypassed the front reception desk without slowing my stride. When a young host in a crisp polo shirt stepped into my path attempting to ask for my membership credentials, I simply flashed a solid titanium black corporate card and kept walking. Confidence is an invisibility cloak in these environments. If you walk like you own the building, nobody dares to stop you. I moved through the plush, quiet corridors toward the expansive outdoor veranda that overlooked the 18th hole. The midday Georgia sun was beating down on the manicured green grass, but under the shaded canopy of the dining area, the air was cool and thick with the smell of expensive cigars and grilled seafood. I spotted Trent immediately. He was sitting at a prime corner table, laughing loudly, his face flushed from the sun and midday liquor. He was flanked by 2 older white men wearing golf visors, who I instantly recognized as prominent Atlanta City Council members. Trent was leaning back in his chair, gesturing broadly with his hands, playing the role of the visionary real estate tycoon to absolute perfection. I was pitching them the very same midtown commercial plaza that my team had just proven was a complete fabrication. He was selling them thin air. I walked straight up to their table. The heavy thud of my boots against the wooden deck finally caught Trent's attention. He stopped mid-sentence, his practiced smile freezing on his face as his eyes locked onto mine. The annoyance in his expression was instantaneous, followed quickly by a flash of sheer disbelief. He genuinely thought his little whispered threat on my parents' front porch the night before had actually scared me off. I thought I was just a broke sister-in-law who would cower at the mention of his lawyers. "Gentlemen," I said, ignoring Trent completely and addressing the 2 politicians with a polite professional nod. "I hate to interrupt your business lunch, but my brother-in-law and I have a pressing family financial emergency that requires his immediate attention. It involves federal compliance regulations, so I am sure you understand." The 2 politicians exchanged a quick, uncomfortable glance. The mere mention of federal compliance is like a bomb threat to a city official. They both stood up immediately, muttering awkward excuses about needing to check their phones and grabbing their golf clubs. Trent tried to stop them, his voice pitching up in a desperate attempt to maintain his cool demeanor. He reached out, insisting they stay for another round of drinks, but the men practically sprinted away from the table, eager to avoid any potential scandal. Once we were entirely alone, Trent slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the expensive silverware. "What is wrong with you, Kiara?" he hissed, leaning forward so the neighboring tables would not hear his outburst. "Are you stalking me now? I told you exactly what would happen if you ever crossed me. You just embarrassed me in front of 2 men who control the zoning board for this entire city. I am going to ruin you for this." I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a single sheet of paper folded into perfect thirds. I slid it slowly across the white linen tablecloth until it rested directly in front of him. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the clinical, lethal precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel. "You do not need zoning permits for a commercial plaza that does not exist, Trent. I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. You need a miracle to pay off the $6 million you owe to the Vanguard private equity syndicate by the end of this month. The blood drained out of his face so fast he looked physically ill. His arrogant posture completely collapsed his shoulders, dropping as he stared down at the piece of paper. On it, I had printed the exact routing number of his Delaware shell company, alongside the dates and exact dollar amounts of his high-interest bridge loans. I leaned over the table, planting my hands flat on the surface, bringing my face just inches from his. I know about the catastrophic margin calls, Trent. I know your family cut you off years ago. I know about the $800,000 you funneled out of my grandmother's reverse mortgage. You disguised it as a commercial consulting fee and dropped it directly into my parents' failing bank accounts to buy their silence. My parents are broke and so are you. You are not a brilliant developer. You are a desperate fraud running a Ponzi scheme on an 82-year-old black woman just to keep your kneecaps from being broken by a private equity mob. Trent opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. His chest heaved as raw panic finally hijacked his nervous system. I watched the beads of sweat form on his forehead and trickle down the side of his face. This was the exact moment his protective bubble of privilege shattered into a million pieces. The reality that a woman he considered a useless failure had completely dismantled his entire financial existence in a matter of hours was breaking his brain. You have 24 hours to return every single dime to Ruby Washington's accounts, I whispered, letting the threat settle deep into his bones. If that money is not sitting securely in her primary trust by noon tomorrow, I am handing this entire financial dossier over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in downtown Atlanta. They will not just arrest you, Trent. They will seize every asset you have left, and they will publicly dismantle your entire family name. I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him suffocating in his own terror on the country club veranda. I strode back through the plush lobby, my heart pounding with pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I had just kicked the hornet's nest, and I knew exactly what a desperate thief would do next. My plan was functioning flawlessly. I needed him to panic because panicked men make massive, traceable mistakes. I reached my car and slid into the driver's seat, immediately pulling out my phone. Jamal answered on the first ring. The trap is set, I told my chief operating officer as I started the engine and threw the car into drive. He is cornered and he is absolutely terrified. Jamal let out a sharp, breathless sound. You timed it perfectly, Kiara. The digital tripwires we placed on his banking portals just went completely haywire. Trent is not waiting 24 hours to figure out a plan. He just logged into the primary wealth management portal, using your grandmother's forged power of attorney. He is bypassing his local banks entirely. What is he doing? I asked, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I merged out of the prestigious country club gates and onto the main road. He is cutting and running, Jamal said, the rapid clacking of his mechanical keyboard echoing loudly through the phone speaker. He just triggered an emergency liquidation protocol. He is attempting to wire the remaining $2 million of Ruby's estate into a heavily encrypted offshore account in the Cayman Islands. If that money clears international waters, we will never see it again. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The twin-turbo engine of my Porsche roared as I aggressively wove through the heavy Atlanta traffic. Jamal, keep your eyes on that routing number, I shouted over the Bluetooth connection. Do not let that wire hit the correspondent bank in New York. If it batches through their automated clearinghouse, Trent will have it sitting in a Caribbean shell account before I even park my car. I am tracking the packet now, Jamal replied, his voice tight with concentration. The funds are in transit, but they have not settled. Trent is using a priority SWIFT transfer. He paid the premium processing fee to expedite the verification. We have a matter of minutes, Kiara. I disconnected the call and focused entirely on the road. The sheer audacity of Trent Sterling was staggering. I had just laid out his entire fraudulent empire on a country club table, and his immediate reaction was not to surrender. It was to double down and try to steal the last remaining $2 million of my grandmother's life savings right in front of my face. He truly believed his wealthy white legacy status made him untouchable. I believed he could outrun the consequences because my parents had spent the last 15 years teaching him that our family would always protect him at my expense. They were all about to learn a devastating lesson in accountability. I slammed the brakes as I pulled into the underground parking garage of my corporate headquarters. I abandoned the car in the executive bay and sprinted toward the private elevator. The stainless steel doors parted, and I stepped directly into the Vanguard Forensic Intelligence War Room. The atmosphere was electric. The massive digital monitors covering the walls were flashing with international banking codes and routing protocols. My team of forensic accountants moved with absolute military precision. "David, where is the wire?" I demanded. Walking straight to the central command table and pulling up the Federal Compliance Interface on my secure terminal. "It just hit the New York clearinghouse," David said, his fingers flying across his illuminated keyboard. "The automated system is verifying the signatures. If it clears this checkpoint, the money jumps to the Cayman Islands and falls under international jurisdiction. We lose all domestic subpoena power." "Not on my watch," I said, my voice dead calm. I logged into the secure portal granted to my firm through our contracts with the Federal Trade Commission. I bypassed the standard banking channels and accessed the direct administrative override protocols used for suspected terrorist financing and massive corporate embezzlement. I typed in my elite federal authorization credentials and targeted the exact transaction identification number David provided. I hit the kill switch. The main monitor in the war room froze. The glowing green status bar indicating the wire transfer halted abruptly. A bright red warning on the screen displaying the words "Administrative Hold Pending Federal Review." A collective breath of relief swept through the room. "We caught it," Jamal said, leaning back in his chair and wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "The 2 million is locked in digital purgatory. It cannot move forward to the Caymans, and it cannot be returned to Trent's shell company without a manual release." Before I could even acknowledge the victory, the secure red phone in the center of the conference table began to ring. It was the direct compliance line. Only elite bank executives and federal regulators used that specific number. I pressed the speakerphone button and leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the glass table. "This is Kiara Washington, CEO of Vanguard Forensic Intelligence," I answered, projecting absolute authority. "Ms. Washington, this is Director Cole from the Global Compliance Division of the bank, handling the sterling transfer." The voice on the other end was rigid, bureaucratic, and completely devoid of emotion. "We just received an emergency federal halt authorization from your firm regarding a $2 million outbound wire. We need immediate clarification. You are disrupting a priority transfer initiated by one of our highest-tier wealth management clients. Your client, Trent Sterling, is actively committing wire fraud and elder abuse," I stated firmly. "The funds he is attempting to move belong to an 82-year-old woman named Ruby Washington. My firm has traced a clear pattern of embezzlement and money laundering over the last 90 days. That administrative hold must remain in place pending a full criminal investigation." There was a heavy pause on the line. I could hear the sound of papers shuffling. "Ms. Washington, we respect your firm's federal credentials, but we are looking at the account authorizations right now. Trent Sterling is not acting as an unauthorized third party. He is the primary executor on the account. He holds an irrevocable power of attorney that was fully executed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk. On paper, this is a completely legal transfer requested by the authorized fiduciary. The power of attorney is fraudulent." I fired back, my anger rising at the frustrating wall of corporate bureaucracy. My grandmother did not sign those documents willingly. My parents and Trent Sterling coerced her or forged the signatures entirely. You cannot allow that money to leave the country. "I understand your allegations," Director Cole replied, his tone remaining infuriatingly neutral. "But an allegation is not a legal directive. The bank cannot permanently freeze a client's assets based on a third-party claim, even from a federal contractor, without due process. We are legally bound to honor the power of attorney." "Then what is the protocol?" I demanded. "I placed the administrative hold. How long do I have before you release the funds back to his control?" "The federal hold you initiated gives you exactly 48 hours, Director Cole stated. "That is the absolute maximum duration we can maintain the freeze without a formal judicial mandate." If the hold expires, the wire transfer will automatically resume processing to the Cayman Islands. What do I need to make the freeze permanent? I asked, pulling a notepad toward me and grabbing a pen. You have two options, Ms. Washington. Option 1 requires a signed order from a superior court judge proving immediate elder abuse and financial fraud, which will officially invalidate the power of attorney. Option 2 requires the primary account holder, Ruby Washington, to physically present herself at one of our local branches. She must provide two forms of government identification and verbally revoke the power of attorney directly to a branch manager. Those are the only two ways to stop this transfer permanently. The clock is ticking. You have 48 hours. The line disconnected, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the war room. I slowly put the pen. Getting a judge to sign an emergency order revoking a power of attorney required a mountain of verified evidence, sworn affidavits, and days of legal maneuvering. We did not have days. We barely had 2. Trent's expensive corporate lawyers would tie up any court proceeding with endless motions and delays until the 48-hour window slammed shut. Option 1 is a dead end, Jamal said, voicing exactly what I was thinking. Trent knows how to play the legal system. He will stall the courts until the money clears, which means we only have option 2, I said, staring at the blank notepad. I have to get Grandma Ruby out of that house and walk her into a bank branch before the freeze lifts. David looked up from his monitor, his expression grim. Kiara, if Trent just got the notification that his wire was blocked by a federal hold, he is going to panic. He knows you are the only one with the power and the motive to do this. He knows you need Grandma Ruby to revoke his access. My heart dropped into my stomach as the terrifying reality of the situation locked into place. Trent was desperate. He owed $6 million to a private equity mob, and I had just frozen his only escape route. A desperate man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. He would not just sit around and wait for me to show up with the police again. He would call my parents. He would tell Warren and Cynthia that their entire fake high society life was about to collapse. They would realize immediately that Grandma Ruby was the only key I had to stopping them. David, track Trent's phone right now. I ordered, my voice tight with sudden mounting dread. Where did he go after he left the country club? Did he go back to his office to meet with his lawyers? David typed furiously, his eyes darting across the tracking software on his screen. No, he said, his voice dropping. He did not go to his office. He bypassed his development firm entirely. Where is he, David? He is at your parents' estate, David answered, looking up at me with wide eyes. And he is not alone. Maya is with him. They just pulled through the security gates. They are going to hide her, I said, the horrifying realization hitting me like a physical blow. They know I am coming for her. They know she is the only one who can walk into a bank and destroy their forged documents. They are going to take her somewhere I cannot find her. The financial war had just ended. The physical rescue mission had officially begun. I slammed the accelerator down, whipping my car out of the corporate parking garage. The financial war had just ended. The physical rescue mission had officially begun. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Jamal, I shouted into the Bluetooth microphone. Pull up every city traffic camera surrounding my parents' gated community right now. Do not lose sight of Trent's vehicle. I am on it, Jamal replied, his voice tight. David is hacking into the municipal grid. The drive to Buckhead normally took 30 minutes, but I made it in 15, tearing through red lights and swerving around slower vehicles. My mind was a dark, chaotic storm of worst-case scenarios. Trent was a desperate man drowning in debt to dangerous people. My parents were terrified of losing their social status. Together, they were a lethal combination. They knew the federal freeze I placed on the wire transfer would expire in 48 hours. They knew the only way to lift that freeze and access the last $2 million was to have Grandma Ruby physically revoke her previous financial protections. I careened onto my parents' street, the tires squealing as I took the sharp turn. The massive iron gates to their estate were wide open. That alone sent a cold spike of pure dread straight through my chest. My father, Warren, was obsessed with security. He never left those gates open unless someone had left in a massive, frantic hurry. I threw my car into park right on the front lawn, not even bothering with the driveway. I sprinted up the sweeping stone steps and grabbed the brass handle of the heavy mahogany front doors. They were unlocked. I pushed them open and stepped into the grand foyer. The house was completely silent. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a mocking, elegant glow over the empty space. "Mom!" I yelled, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Dad!" There was no answer. I ran past the formal living room and sprinted down the long corridor leading to the guest wing. My heart pounded against my ribs like a sledgehammer. I reached the end of the hall and pushed open the door to Grandma Ruby's suite. I stopped dead in my tracks. The breath was completely knocked out of my lungs. The room had been stripped entirely bare. It looked like a sterile hotel room that had never been occupied. The vintage quilt Grandma loved so much was gone from the bed. Her entire closet had been emptied. Her medication organizers, the stack of novels she kept on her nightstand, even the framed photographs of our family had been wiped out. They did not just move her. They meticulously erased her presence to make it look like she had packed up her belongings and relocated voluntarily. I walked slowly into the center of the room, the sickening reality of the situation washing over me. My mother and father had actually helped Trent and Maya kidnap their own mother. Cynthia had packed her own mother's bags. Warren had looked the other way, while a desperate fraudster dragged an 82-year-old woman out of her home. As I looked down at the pristine carpet, a small glint of light caught my eye. I knelt down near the edge of the bed and picked up a tiny silver object. It was one of Grandma's pearl earrings. The clasp was broken. She never took her pearls off without carefully placing them in her jewelry box. A broken clasp meant she had resisted. She had fought them. They had forced her out of this room against her will. I pressed 2 fingers against my earpiece. "Jamal, they took her. The room is completely empty. Where did they go?" David jumped onto the comms channel, his fingers clacking furiously against his keyboard. I caught them on the intersection cameras, Kiara. Trent's black SUV blew through a red light heading south on the interstate. Your parents are driving right behind him in your father's sedan. It is a full family convoy. But we have a problem. They took the exit near the Southern Industrial District, and we lost their visual. The city cameras in that sector have been out of service for weeks. I paced the length of the empty bedroom, my mind racing through the legal and financial parameters of Trent's dilemma. "Think about the logistics," I told my team. "Trent needs Grandma Ruby to sign a total asset relinquishment document to bypass my federal freeze. But Grandma is sharp. She knows exactly what they are trying to do, and she will never sign that paper willingly. They cannot just hold her hostage in a warehouse. They need a controlled environment. They need to incapacitate her." I walked out of the room and sprinted back down the hallway toward the front door. David cross-referenced the board members of that predatory private equity syndicate Trent owes money to. Cross-reference those names with any medical facilities, transitional care clinics, or unlisted nursing homes in the Southern Industrial District. Trent is entirely broke. He cannot afford to pay a legitimate high-end medical transport team to hide a kidnapped woman. He has to use someone inside his criminal network, someone who operates completely off the books. I jumped back into my car and slammed the door, firing up the engine. "Send me a location right now," I demanded. The secure line went dead quiet for a grueling 60 seconds. The only sound was the roar of my car engine as I sped back towards the highway heading south. Then David's voice cracked through the speaker, sharp and urgent. "I have a direct hit, Kiara. One of the primary investors in Trent's private equity mob is a man named Victor. Victor owns a string of unlisted, unlicensed assisted living facilities on the outskirts of the city. They are essentially black site holding pens used for undocumented patients or off-the-books medical procedures. There is a facility registered to one of Victor's shell companies exactly 2 miles from where Trent's SUV dropped off the grid. Sending you the coordinates now." The navigation system on my dashboard lit up with a red pin drop in a desolate industrial sector. "What is their play?" I asked, my grip on the steering wheel tightening until my hands ached. Jamal intercepted the communication relay. "Kiara, you need to drive faster. We just breached the internal network of Victor's facility. Trent sent an encrypted email to the facility director 10 minutes ago. Read it to me," I ordered. Jamal's voice dropped heavy with disgust. Trent requested a maximum dosage of heavy chemical sedatives to be prepped immediately for a new incoming patient named Ruby Washington. The email specifically asks for a specialized cocktail designed to induce severe compliance and memory loss. Trent also confirmed that a private corrupt notary is arriving at the facility in exactly 2 hours. The horrific, twisted reality of their escalation clicked perfectly into place. They were going to chemically lobotomize my grandmother. They planned to pump an 82-year-old woman full of dangerous, unregulated sedatives until she was completely physically and mentally incapacitated. They knew her age and her heart condition made heavy sedation a massive medical risk. She could easily suffer a fatal stroke or a heart attack. But Trent did not care if she survived the night. My parents did not care if their own mother lived to see tomorrow. They only cared that her heart kept beating long enough for them to force a pen into her limp hand. They were going to make her sign the final asset relinquishment document in front of a paid-off notary. Once that ink dried, Trent could bypass the bank branch entirely. He could fax the newly notarized override directly to the Global Compliance Division, and my federal hold would instantly dissolve. The last $2 million would vanish into the Cayman Islands, and Grandma Ruby would be left to die in a chemical haze in an unlicensed facility. They had crossed the line from financial fraud into attempted murder. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, the speedometer climbing dangerously high as I merged onto the southbound interstate. Send a highly encrypted alert to my private security contractors. I told Jamal, my voice completely devoid of any fear or hesitation. Tell them to converge on the facility coordinates and wait for my signal. I am going in. My family thought they had successfully disposed of the useless daughter. They thought their pristine reputation and their legacy names gave them the power to play God with my grandmother's life. They were about to find out exactly what happens when the scapegoat they created turns into the predator they never saw coming. The engine of my Porsche screamed as I took the sharp exit into the Southern Industrial District. The glittering Atlanta skyline vanished in my rearview mirror, replaced by a bleak wasteland of abandoned warehouses, broken streetlights, and rusting chain-link fences. This was the dark underbelly of the city, a place where people with enough money could make their problems disappear without a trace. Jamal was a steady, rapid-fire voice in my earpiece, feeding me turn-by-turn directions as I navigated the maze of unmarked, pothole-ridden gravel roads. I whipped my car behind a massive row of rusted shipping containers, completely obscuring my vehicle from the main approach. 2 black tactical SUVs belonging to my private security contractors were already idling silently in the shadows. My lead security director, Tyson, stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a mountain of a man, an ex-military operative who asked 0 questions and moved with lethal efficiency. He gave me a single sharp nod. The perimeter was secured, but we had absolutely no time to spare. I popped the trunk of my car and grabbed a generic silver clipboard. I unclipped my federal contractor badge, flipping it around, so only the imposing gold seal of the United States government was visible against my tailored blazer. I was not going to break down the door with guns blazing. That would trigger a lockdown and put my grandmother in the crossfire. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to weaponize the crushing weight of bureaucracy and absolute authority. Follow my lead and do not let anyone touch their phones, I told Tyson. We marched directly up to the heavy reinforced steel door of the facility. There was no signage, no windows, and no indication that this concrete bunker was a medical clinic. It looked exactly like a meat locker. I did not search for a doorbell. I hammered my fist against the steel with enough force to rattle the hinges. 10 seconds later, a small sliding metal slot scraped open. A burly man with a thick neck and a suspicious scowl glared out at us. "We are closed," he grunted, his eyes darting to Tyson standing rigidly behind me. "No visitors." I shoved my federal badge directly against the metal slot. "State Department of Community Health, Emergency Audit Division Y," snapped my voice, cracking like a whip. "Open this door immediately." We received an anonymous whistleblower tip regarding the administration of unregulated Schedule II, narcotics and gross elder abuse at this unlicensed facility. You have exactly 10 seconds to disengage that deadbolt, or my tactical team will breach the entrance, and every single person inside this building will be facing federal trafficking charges. The man hesitated, his eyes widening in sheer panic. People who run illegal black site medical facilities are terrified of two things: the police and federal health inspectors. 10. I started counting loudly, slapping my palm against the steel. 9. 8. I am calling the federal raid units right now. Wait, the man stammered. The heavy metallic clatter of multiple deadbolts sliding back echoed through the humid air. The steel door creaked open. I did not wait for him to welcome me. I shoved the door hard, stepping into a dimly lit, suffocatingly warm corridor that smelled strongly of industrial bleach and unwashed linens. The conditions were horrific. Tyson and two other security operatives flanked me, instantly pinning the guard against the wall and confiscating his radio. "Where is the patient manifest?" I demanded, getting right into the guard's face. "Where is the elderly black woman who was brought in here less than 30 minutes ago?" He swallowed hard, shaking his head. "I just guard the door. I do not know any names." They put the new arrivals in the secure wing down the hall. Jamal came through my earpiece, his typing frantic. "Kiara, I hacked their internal closed circuit feed. She is in room 4 at the end of the corridor. You have to hurry." The medical orderly just entered the room with a surgical tray. I sprinted down the narrow, flickering hallway, my boots slamming against the cheap linoleum floor. The sheer horror of what my parents and Trent were willing to do to their own flesh and blood fueled every step I took. They were willing to lock a brilliant, vibrant 82-year-old woman in this squalid nightmare just to steal her money. They were monsters hiding behind designer clothes. I reached the heavy wooden door marked with appealing number 4 and kicked it open with the flat of my boot. The scene inside made my blood run entirely cold. Grandma Ruby was lying on a rigid, stained hospital bed. She looked frail and deeply disoriented, her eyes half open and unfocused. A man in dirty green scrubs was standing over her, tapping a massive medical syringe to clear the air bubbles. He was seconds away from plunging a lethal cocktail of heavy chemical sedatives into her fragile veins. "Step away from the patient right now," I roared, leveling my clipboard at him like a weapon. The orderly jumped, dropping the syringe onto the metal tray with a loud clatter. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted, stepping back from the bed. "I am your worst nightmare," I said, closing the distance and violently shoving the surgical tray across the room. The glass vials and syringes shattered against the concrete wall. Tyson stepped into the room right behind me, crossing his arms and blocking the only exit. The orderly took one look at my security team and backed into the corner, raising his hands in terrified surrender. I rushed to the side of the bed, falling to my knees. "Grandma?" I whispered, my voice breaking for the first time all night. I gently took her hands. They were trembling and icy cold. "Grandma, it is me. It is Kiara." Her head turned slowly. The confusion in her eyes began to clear, replaced by a sudden brilliant spark of recognition. "My bluebird," she breathed, her voice raspy but steady. "I knew you would find the cage. I got you, I promised," wrapping my arms around her frail shoulders. "I am getting you out of here right now. I need an extraction team in here," I barked at Tyson. "Get a wheelchair. Wrap her in a blanket. We are moving." Tyson signaled his men. They moved with incredible speed, securing a transport chair from the hallway and gently lifting my grandmother into it. I wrapped a thick woolen blanket around her shoulders, shielding her from the harsh, sterile environment. We wheeled her out of the room, leaving the terrified orderly cowering in the corner. Just as we reached the midpoint of the corridor, Jamal's voice pierced through my earpiece, sharp and filled with imminent danger. "Kiara, you have a massive problem. Trent's black SUV just pulled onto the access road. Your parents' sedan is right behind him. They are pulling up to the front security gate right now. You have less than 2 minutes before they walk through that front door." My heart hammered against my ribs. If Trent and my parents walked into this hallway and saw me wheeling Grandma Ruby out, the situation would escalate into a violent physical altercation. Trent was desperate enough to try and physically rip the wheelchair away from me, and a brawl would put my grandmother at severe risk of injury. "Pivot to the service exit." I commanded my team, spinning the wheelchair around. "We are going out the back." We rushed down the opposite end of the corridor, pushing through a set of heavy double-fire doors. The humid, oppressive Georgia night air hit us instantly. We were on an elevated concrete loading dock surrounded by overflowing dumpsters. "Bring the vehicles around to the loading bay," I ordered into my comms. Tires screeched in the distance as Tyson's drivers navigated the tactical SUVs around the perimeter of the sprawling warehouse. Through the thick concrete walls behind me, I could hear the muffled, furious shouting of Trent Sterling echoing in the front lobby. He was screaming at the security guard, demanding to know who broke the lock on the front door. They had discovered the breach. The black armored SUV skidded to a halt directly beneath the loading dock. Tyson and I lifted Grandma Ruby securely into the spacious back seat, buckling her in and locking the heavy doors. I jumped into the front passenger seat, slamming my door shut, just as the deafening crash of the service exit doors bursting open echoed across the loading bay. "Drive," I shouted. The SUV peeled out, tires biting into the gravel, sending a cloud of thick dust into the air. I looked out the tinted passenger window as we sped away. Standing on the edge of the loading dock, bathed in the harsh yellow security lights, was Trent. His face was contorted in absolute primal rage. My father stood right behind him, his perfect country club suit ruined by the grime of the warehouse, looking frantically around the empty parking lot. They had missed us by a fraction of a second. They had arrived with their corrupt notary fully prepared to drug and rob an elderly woman, only to find an empty bed and shattered glass on the floor. I watched their shrinking figures in the side mirror as our convoy merged seamlessly back onto the highway, disappearing into the anonymity of the midnight traffic. They had no idea who took her. They had no idea I was sitting in the front seat of that tactical vehicle. They were completely stripped of their leverage, trapped in an illegal black site facility, with a mountain of debt rapidly suffocating them. Grandma Ruby reached forward from the back seat, resting her warm hand gently on my shoulder. "You always were the smartest person in our family, Kiara," she said softly. "What do we do now?" I looked at the road ahead, a cold, calculating smile forming on my lips. "Now," I replied, my voice laced with absolute certainty, "we let them panic. And then we burn their entire fake empire to the ground." The adrenaline slowly bled out of my system as my private security team pulled into the heavily guarded underground parking garage of an exclusive medical facility in downtown Atlanta. I had personally vetted this private clinic months ago for high-profile corporate whistleblowers who needed off-the-books physical protection. Tyson and his tactical operatives swiftly transferred Grandma Ruby to a plush, medically equipped suite on the top floor. The moment the heavy, reinforced steel doors locked behind us, I finally let out the breath I felt like I had been holding since I stood on my parents' front porch the night before. Grandma was exhausted, but the terrifying glaze of those heavy, unregulated sedatives had completely worn off. A private physician assessed her vitals, immediately confirming her heart rate was stable and her blood pressure was returning to normal. I sat on the edge of her pristine hospital bed, holding her fragile hands in mine. "You are completely safe now," I promised her, smoothing a stray silver curl from her forehead. "They cannot touch you here. I have armed guards stationed at every elevator, bank, and stairwell in this building." Grandma Ruby offered a tired but fiercely proud smile. Her grip on my fingers tightened with surprising strength. "I knew Trent was a snake the very day Maya brought him home to the estate," she rasped, her voice gaining clarity. "But I never imagined my own son Warren would stand by and watch that man try to put me in the ground just to save his precious country club membership. We are going to make them pay for this, Kiara, every last red cent." I squeezed her hands, firmly locking eyes with the only family member who had ever believed in me. "Tomorrow morning, we bring a mobile notary and a federal magistrate right to this bed," I assured her. "You will officially sign the affidavit revoking that forged power of attorney, and we will permanently lock Trent out of those offshore accounts. The nightmare is over." I kissed her cheek and stepped out into the quiet hallway, feeling an intoxicating rush of absolute victory. I had beaten them at their own ruthless game. I had physically outsmarted the golden child, her arrogant husband, and the parents who treated me like dirt for 15 years. I went home to my downtown loft that night and slept for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, completely convinced the war was won. The next morning, I walked into Vanguard Forensic Intelligence feeling completely untouchable. I wore a sharp crimson power suit, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floors of my empire with the rhythm of a conqueror. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the war room in bright, triumphant light. Jamal and David were already positioned at the central glass table, pulling up the final freezing orders for the Cayman Island accounts. The 48-hour federal hold expires exactly at noon, Jamal stated, handing me a steaming cup of black coffee as I approached the monitors. But the federal magistrate is scheduled to arrive at Grandma Ruby's medical suite at 10 o'clock. Once she signs the revocation affidavit, we digitize the mandate directly to the Global Compliance Director at the bank. Trent's entire shell company will implode before we even take our lunch break. I took a sip of the dark coffee, savoring the bitter taste of impending justice. Trent was probably pacing a hole in the floor of his empty, non-existent Midtown Development office, sweating through his custom-tailored shirt. My mother, Cynthia, was likely sobbing into her expensive silk pillows, realizing the extravagant charity gala she was planning for this weekend would become the stage of her ultimate social demise. They were cornered, trapped in the very financial cage they tried to build for my grandmother. Prepare the prosecution dossier for the Federal Trade Commission, I instructed David, pointing to the main monitor. I want every forged signature, every offshore wire transfer, and every piece of encrypted communication regarding that unlicensed black site clinic wrapped in a neat little bow. We are not just freezing his money. We are handing the feds a silver platter of racketeering and elder abuse charges. Just as David reached for his keyboard, a sudden deafening crash shattered the focused calm of the war room. The heavy frosted glass doors of my executive suite were violently kicked open, slamming against the walls with a force that made the entire room shake. I spun around, my coffee spilling across the glass table. Marching into my pristine corporate sanctuary were 4 burly Atlanta Police Department detectives, their silver badges flashing aggressively against their dark suits. Behind them, 2 uniformed patrol officers secured the perimeter of my office, effectively locking down the entire floor. My employees froze, staring in absolute shock as the armed men stormed directly toward the central command table where I stood. Kiara Washington, the lead detective, barked, his hand resting intimidatingly on his heavy utility belt. Step away from the monitors and keep your hands exactly where I can see them. I squared my shoulders, refusing to show even a fraction of an inch of intimidation. Excuse me, detective, I said, my voice dropping into a deadly, authoritative calm. You have just breached a federal contracting facility without presenting a warrant. You are currently trespassing in a highly restricted zone. The detective let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, folded document, slamming it down directly on top of my forensic files. I have an emergency felony arrest warrant issued by a Superior Court judge, signed exactly 20 minutes ago. You are under arrest for the kidnapping and unlawful detainment of an 82-year-old vulnerable adult. The words hit me like a runaway freight train. Kidnapping. Your father, Warren Washington, and your brother-in-law, Trent Sterling, filed a priority police report at 6 o'clock this morning. The detective continued, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. They provided sworn medical affidavits from 2 private physicians stating that your grandmother, Ruby Washington, suffers from advanced stage dementia and is medically incapable of making her own decisions. They also provided high-definition security footage of you and unidentified armed mercenaries breaching a transitional care facility last night and forcibly removing her against medical advice. The sheer calculated evil of their counterattack paralyzed my lungs for a fraction of a second. Trent did not just panic when I stole Grandma Ruby out of his black site. He immediately weaponized his wealth and his white legacy status to flip the entire narrative. He used his corrupt medical contacts to fabricate a severe dementia diagnosis overnight. My own father walked into a police precinct and swore under oath that his erratic, estranged dropout daughter had suffered a mental break and abducted a helpless old woman for ransom. They are lying. I fired back, my pulse hammering wildly against my ribs. Trent Sterling is attempting to embezzle $4 million from her estate. I removed her from an unlicensed facility where they were actively attempting to drug her into compliance. I am a forensic fraud investigator, working with federal authorities to stop a massive financial crime. Tell it to the judge, the detective snapped, stepping forward and grabbing my arm with jarring, aggressive force. He did not care about my federal contracts. He only saw the perfectly crafted narrative handed to him by a wealthy white developer and a prominent Atlanta socialite family. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Jamal stepped forward, his fists clenched, ready to physically intervene, but I shot him a fierce warning look. If my team interfered, Trent would win. He wanted me to look unstable. He wanted a chaotic, violent scene in my office that would justify his fake police report and keep me locked in a holding cell past the noon deadline. I complied, turning my back to the detective. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked brutally around my wrists, biting into my skin. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the silent, horrified office. I was paraded out of the war room, marched past my stunned, brilliant staff of analysts and investigators like a common violent criminal. Trent and my parents had orchestrated the ultimate humiliation. They knew they could not beat me financially, so they used their high society influence to strip me of my freedom just hours before the federal freeze expired. As the elevator doors closed, sealing me inside with the detectives, I realized I had severely underestimated the depths of their depravity. I thought I had won the battle, but my family had just dropped a nuclear bomb right on top of my life. The cold steel of the interrogation table bit into my cuffed wrists. I sat in absolute silence, staring at the peeling gray paint on the wall of the Atlanta police precinct. Across from me sat Detective Harrison. He leaned back in his squeaky metal chair, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, radiating the unearned confidence of a man who believed he held my entire future in his hands. "You know you really messed up this time, Kiara," he said, shaking his head with a patronizing smirk. "Trent Sterling and your father are pillars of this community. They fund the police athletic league, they build hospitals, and you, a woman with no steady employment history, burst into a medical facility and dragged a dementia patient out into the night. That is kidnapping. That is reckless endangerment. You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary, all because you wanted to extort your family for cash." I did not blink. I did not defend myself. I just let him talk, digging his own professional grave with every arrogant assumption he made. He looked at my simple business suit and saw exactly what my family had trained the world to see: a desperate, bitter outcast. He had no idea that my firm regularly audited the very police pension fund he relied on. "I am not saying a single word until my legal counsel arrives," I stated, my voice perfectly level. Detective Harrison scoffed, slamming a thick file onto the table. "Your public defender is not going to save you from a felony kidnapping charge. We have the medical affidavits. We have the security footage. The district attorney is already drafting the indictment." Right on cue, the heavy metal door of the interrogation room swung open. It was not a weary, overworked public defender who walked through the frame. It was Elias Thompson, the most ruthless, high-stakes corporate defense attorney in the state of Georgia. Elias wore a bespoke navy suit and carried a slim leather briefcase. He did not ask for permission to enter. He commanded the room the second his expensive leather shoes hit the linoleum floor. "Take those handcuffs off my client immediately," Elias demanded, slapping a stack of documents onto the metal table right over the detective's file. Detective Harrison stood up, his face flushing red with sudden anger. "Excuse me, counselor, but your client is an active flight risk facing serious felony charges involving a vulnerable adult. The Sterling family has already requested a protective order." Elias did not even raise his voice. He simply tapped the top document on his stack. "My client is the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Forensic Intelligence. She is currently operating under a direct federal contract with the Federal Trade Commission, investigating a multi-million-dollar wire fraud and elder abuse syndicate. You just unlawfully arrested a federal contractor based on a perjured police report filed by the very suspects she is investigating. Now remove the handcuffs before I sue this precinct into bankruptcy and end your career by lunch." The color rapidly drained from Detective Harrison's face. He looked down at the document, seeing the official federal seals and my actual corporate credentials. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his keys, unlocking the cold metal bands around my wrists. I rubbed my arms slowly, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the terrified detective. "Now," Elias said, pulling a sleek digital tablet from his briefcase and setting it upright on the table. "You claimed my client's grandmother suffers from severe dementia and was kidnapped against her will. I strongly suggest you watch this video recorded exactly 2 hours ago at a highly secure, undisclosed medical facility. Elias tapped the screen. The video buffered for a fraction of a second before filling the small interrogation room with crisp, high-definition audio and video. Grandma Ruby appeared on the screen, sitting comfortably in a plush armchair bathed in warm morning sunlight. She looked directly into the camera lens. Her posture was regal, her eyes sharp and completely focused. "My name's Ruby Washington," she stated, her voice projecting absolute clarity and strength. "Today is Friday, October 12th. I am 82 years old, and I am in full possession of all my mental faculties. I am recording this statement voluntarily and under my own free will." Detective Harrison leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table as he watched the woman he had just declared a helpless dementia patient speak with more coherence than most of his own officers. "I was not kidnapped," Grandma Ruby continued, her tone hardening with fierce, righteous anger. "I was rescued. Over the past 6 months, my son Warren Washington and his son-in-law Trent Sterling have held me captive in my own home. They forged my signature on an irrevocable power of attorney. They liquidated my mutual funds and drained my reverse mortgage to pay off Trent's massive hidden debts. Last night, they forcibly moved me to a filthy, unlicensed medical facility. A man in green scrubs attempted to inject me with heavy chemical sedatives so they could force me to sign away the last $2 million of my estate. My granddaughter Kiara saved my life. I am currently under private security protection requested by me because I am terrified my family will murder me for my money." The video ended. The screen faded to black. The silence in the interrogation room was absolute and suffocating. Detective Harrison stared at the blank tablet, his mouth slightly open. He realized in real time that he had been played. Trent and Warren had used his badge as a weapon to silence a federal whistleblower. They had handed him fabricated medical documents to cover up an attempted murder and a multi-million-dollar heist. Elias folded his arms, staring the detective down. "That is a sworn, time-stamped declaration from the alleged victim, explicitly stating she is safe and seeking protection from the men who filed your police report. We also submitted copies of the forged bank transfers and the address of the illegal black site clinic your suspects used last night. The district attorney has already received this exact same file." The detective's radio crackled, but he ignored it. He looked at me, the arrogant smirk entirely gone, replaced by profound professional panic. "Ms. Washington," he stammered, taking a step back. "I had no idea. The affidavits they provided looked completely legitimate. They swore under oath that you were a danger to her." I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my crimson power suit. "They are fighting for their financial survival, detective. They will say whatever they need to say to keep their facade intact. But their lies just became your massive liability. I suggest you get your story straight with the district attorney." Elias and I walked out of the interrogation room, the heavy metal door closing behind us. We bypassed the busy bullpen of the precinct, where officers parted like the Red Sea, recognizing the sudden shift in power. I stepped out through the front glass doors of the station and took a deep breath of the warm Atlanta air. The midday sun was blinding, but I felt completely wide awake. Jamal was waiting by the curb, leaning against my Porsche. He tossed me a sleek black encrypted phone as I approached. "The charges are officially dropped," he confirmed, a fierce smile breaking across his face. "The district attorney just threw the entire kidnapping file into the shredder. You are free and clear, Kiara." I did not smile back. Getting out of jail was the bare minimum. Trent and my parents had just shown me exactly how far they were willing to go to protect their image. They had tried to lock me in a concrete cell for decades just to buy themselves a few hours to steal my grandmother's money. They thought their pristine high society reputation was an impenetrable shield. As long as they possessed that social standing, they would continue to use the police, the courts, and the country club elite as weapons against me. Playing defense was no longer an option. I needed to destroy their shield entirely. "Where are they right now?" I asked Jamal, leaning against the hood of the car. Jamal pulled up the tracking interface on his tablet. "They are acting like absolutely nothing happened. They think you are still sitting in a holding cell, waiting for a bail hearing. Your parents are currently at the downtown Grand Ballroom. They are overseeing the final preparations for their massive black tie charity gala tonight, the Philanthropic Foundation launch." I said, the pieces rapidly clicking into place. Maya had bragged about it for weeks. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of their social calendar. Hundreds of wealthy Atlanta elites, investors, and politicians were attending. Exactly, Jamal nodded. Trent and Maya are using that foundation as the ultimate laundering vehicle. They plan to announce a massive initial endowment tonight, which is actually just the stolen money they expected to wire offshore. They are going to stand on stage and accept humanitarian awards funded by elder abuse. I looked at the bustling city street, my mind processing the perfect, devastating counterstrike. They worshipped the public eye. They sacrificed their own blood to maintain the illusion of absolute perfection. If I took them down in a quiet courtroom, they would spin the narrative. They would use their expensive lawyers to seal the records and tell their friends it was just a private family dispute. I could not let them hide behind closed doors. I had to burn their fraudulent empire to ash in front of the exact people they spent their entire lives trying to impress. Jamal, I said, pushing away from the car and straightening my shoulders. Call the tactical team. I want full access to the audio-visual booth at the downtown Grand Ballroom tonight. I do not care how much it costs to buy out the sound engineers. Just get it done. Jamal grinned, his fingers already flying across his screen. Done. What is your play, Kiara? I looked down at my wrinkled business suit, the only evidence of my morning in a jail cell. I need a dress, Jamal. Get me the most expensive custom designer gown money can buy. My family thinks they locked away a broke, useless dropout. Tonight they are going to meet the predator that hunts them. I am crashing the gala. The downtown Grand Ballroom was the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society. For my parents, it was the holy grail of social validation. Tonight, the sprawling venue was draped in white silk and gold accents packed to the brim with the city's most influential politicians, elite business owners, and legacy families. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos glided through the crowd, carrying trays of expensive champagne, while a live string quartet played softly from a raised balcony. At the center of it all stood my mother, Cynthia, draped in an obscenely expensive custom gown, basking in the admiring glances of the women she had spent 20 years trying to impress. Beside her, my father Warren puffed out his chest, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. They were celebrating the launch of the Sterling Washington Philanthropic Foundation. It was a beautiful, glittering lie. Trent and Maya stood near the main stage, clinking glasses with a prominent federal judge, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire empire was currently sitting on a digital chopping block. They had branded this foundation as an initiative to fund urban renewal projects, but I knew the exact routing numbers attached to the charity's primary account. It was a specialized offshore funnel designed to wash the stolen millions from Grandma Ruby's estate before transferring the untraceable cash directly to Trent's private equity creditors. They thought they had successfully locked me in a concrete holding cell, giving them the perfect runway to execute their grand finale. They forgot that a cornered predator is the most dangerous thing in the room. My sleek black town car pulled up to the red carpet entrance. The valet rushed forward, opening the door. I stepped out onto the carpet and the crisp evening air hit my face. I was not wearing my usual tailored business suit. I was wearing a breathtaking custom floor-length emerald gown that clung to my silhouette with ruthless precision. Diamonds rested against my collarbone, and my hair was styled in an immaculate crown of natural curls. I did not look like the broke, miserable college dropout my family had described to these people for the last decade and a half. I looked like a woman who owned the building. I walked through the towering glass doors of the ballroom, and the shift in the atmosphere was immediate. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The elite circles of Atlanta are small, and while they did not recognize me as a member of their social clubs, they recognized raw, undeniable power when it walked into a room. I moved purposefully through the sea of tuxedos and ball gowns, keeping my eyes locked on the main stage. My mother spotted me first. I watched the champagne flute nearly slip from her hand. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified beneath her heavy makeup. She frantically grabbed my father's arm, digging her nails into his tuxedo jacket. Warren turned, his eyes widening in sheer disbelief as he saw me walking freely through the crowd. He instantly began signaling wildly to the perimeter security guards, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. The head of security, a massive man with an earpiece, moved to intercept me, blocking my path to the stage. "Ma'am, this is a private event," he stated, raising a hand to stop me. I need to see your invitation. I did not slow my pace. I reached into my emerald clutch and smoothly pulled out my solid titanium federal contractor badge, pressing it flat against his chest. I am conducting an active federal fraud investigation on behalf of the United States government. I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal command. The individuals hosting this event are the primary targets of a multi-million-dollar wire fraud syndicate. If you lay a hand on me, you will be charged with obstructing a federal agent. Now step aside. The security chief's eyes darted from the gold seal on my badge to the absolute certainty in my eyes. He swallowed hard, dropping his hand and taking a wide step back, effectively clearing my path. My father watched in absolute horror as his own hired security failed to protect his fragile kingdom. I ascended the short flight of stairs to the main stage just as Trent took his place behind the crystal podium. He was adjusting the microphone, flashing his trademark arrogant smile to the crowd, preparing to deliver his keynote address about family values and charitable giving. He did not see me until I was standing right beside him. Trent turned to look at me, and his confident smile shattered into a mask of pure, unfiltered panic. He physically recoiled, bumping into the podium. Kiara, he choked out his voice, barely a whisper over the low hum of the crowd. How are you here? You are supposed to be in jail. I did not answer him. I simply reached out and took the microphone directly from his trembling hand. I turned to face the hundreds of wealthy elites staring up at the stage. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The silence in the massive ballroom was absolute and suffocating. I looked down at my mother, who was visibly hyperventilating, clinging to my sister Maya, who looked like she had just seen a ghost. Good evening, everyone. I projected my voice clear and unwavering, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. My name is Kiara Washington. For those of you who know my parents, Warren and Cynthia, you have likely been told that I am an unstable college dropout who refuses to work. That was the convenient story they sold you to explain why I refused to participate in their social climbing. But tonight requires complete transparency. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the stunned crowd. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Forensic Intelligence, I continued. I am the lead forensic investigator, contracted by the Federal Trade Commission, and I specialize in dismantling corporate fraud. Murmurs of shock rippled through the audience. I saw cell phones emerging from purses and tuxedo pocket screens glowing as people began to record. The philanthropic foundation you are celebrating tonight does not exist to help this community, I stated, my gaze burning into Trent. It exists to launder money stolen from my 82-year-old grandmother. Trent lunged forward, trying to grab the microphone back. Turn off the sound, he screamed to the back of the room. She is lying. Turn off the sound right now. I sidestepped him smoothly, keeping a firm grip on the mic. Right on cue, the massive digital projection screens behind the stage, designed to display the fake charity's logo, flickered and changed. Jamal had successfully bypassed their audio-visual feed just as we planned. The screens illuminated with undeniable high-definition proof. I did not just tell the crowd about the fraud, I showed them. The screen displayed the forged, irrevocable power of attorney side by side with Grandma Ruby's actual signature, proving the blatant forgery. The slide transitioned to reveal Trent Sterling's massive hidden debt notices, highlighting the $6 million he owed to a predatory private equity mob. Then the offshore banking routing numbers flashed across the screen, drawing a direct, brightly colored digital line from my grandmother's reverse mortgage straight into Trent and Maya's personal shell accounts. This man, I said, pointing directly at Trent, is completely bankrupt. He used his privilege and his legacy name to manipulate my desperate status-obsessed parents into handing over their own mother's life savings. Just 12 hours ago, they attempted to lock an 82-year-old woman in an unlicensed black site clinic to drug her into compliance. And when I rescued her, they filed a perjured police report to have me falsely arrested for kidnapping to buy themselves enough time to wire the stolen cash to the Cayman Islands. The ballroom erupted. The polite whispers turned into loud, horrified gasps. The very politicians and investors my family had spent decades trying to impress were now staring at them with absolute revulsion. The social exile was instantaneous. The pressure cooker of their fake perfection finally exploded. Cornered by irrefutable evidence and the crushing weight of public humiliation, the family turned on each other like starving animals. Trent grabbed the spare microphone off the stand, his face slick with sweat. He pointed a shaking finger at Maya and my parents. I did not force them to do anything, he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Warren gave me the account numbers. Maya forged the signatures. They wanted the money just as much as I did. They were going to lose this precious country club lifestyle if I did not bail them out. They handed the old woman over to me. Maya shrieked, lunging toward the edge of the stage. "You manipulative liar," she screamed at her husband, tears of fury ruining her pristine makeup. "You told us the money was just a bridge loan. You promised you would pay it back. You ruined us." Warren shoved his way through the crowd, pointing furiously at Trent. "You white devil," he roared, his booming voice cracking under the strain. "You used our family. You manipulated my wife. You told us the investments were secure. I will kill you for destroying my name." Cynthia collapsed into a chair, crying hysterically, burying her face in her hands as the women she had desperately tried to impress physically backed away from her, treating her like an infectious disease. Their beautiful, flawless family tore itself to shreds on a brightly lit stage, broadcasting their profound greed and profound dysfunction to the entire city. I stood back and watched the implosion. I did not need to yell or argue. The truth was doing all the heavy lifting for me. Trent realized in real time that his life was entirely over. He saw the cell phones recording his confession. He saw the elite investors dialing their own lawyers to pull their backing from his remaining projects. His breathing turned ragged. He dropped the microphone, letting it hit the stage with a loud, screeching feedback loop. He turned his back on his screaming wife and bolted for the heavy emergency exit doors on the side of the ballroom. I thought he could just run away from the wreckage like he always did. He thought he could slip into the Atlanta night and use whatever remaining connections he had to escape the fallout. He threw his entire body weight against the crash bar of the side exit. The heavy doors swung open wide, revealing the brightly lit hallway outside the ballroom. Trent froze, completely paralyzed in the doorway. Standing shoulder to shoulder blocking the entire hallway was a dozen federal agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the letters FBI. The lead agent stepped forward, holding a thick stack of warrants, unholstering a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. They were not there to negotiate or listen to his smooth legacy charm. They were there to collect. The heavy brass push bar of the emergency exit yielded under Trent's desperate weight, but the escape he envisioned evaporated the second the doors swung wide. He froze, completely paralyzed in the brightly lit corridor. Standing shoulder to shoulder, creating an impenetrable human wall, were 12 federal agents wearing dark tactical vests emblazoned with the bold yellow letters FBI. The lead agent, a tall man with a severe expression, stepped forward, unholstering a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He did not yell or draw a weapon. He did not need to. The sheer, overwhelming presence of federal authority sucked the remaining oxygen right out of Trent's lungs. "Trent Sterling, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." The lead agent stated, his voice echoing down the marble hallway with cold, mechanical precision. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Trent opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The arrogant, untouchable real estate developer who had casually threatened me on my parents' front porch just 24 hours ago was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, broken man, drowning in a sea of his own making. He slowly turned around his shoulders, slumping in absolute defeat. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting securely around his wrists was the loudest sound in the corridor. The agents did not quietly usher him out a back service door. Protocol required them to process him through the main security checkpoint, which meant walking him directly back across the perimeter of the grand ballroom. The massive wooden doors of the main hall were propped open. Hundreds of Atlanta's wealthiest politicians, legacy investors, and socialites stood in stunned absolute silence as they watched the guest of honor being walked through the venue by federal authorities. Trent kept his head down, staring at the polished floor, completely humiliated, stripped of the white privilege and generational wealth he had used as a shield his entire life. As the agents escorted Trent past the stage, Maya let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She scrambled down the short flight of stairs, her designer gown catching on the steps, tripping her. She rushed toward the agents, reaching out for her husband. "Trent, tell them this is a mistake," she sobbed, her pristine makeup running down her face in dark, jagged streaks. "Tell them you have lawyers. Call your father." Trent did not even look at her. He just kept walking, his spirit entirely broken. But Maya did not have time to process her husband's abandonment. Two female federal agents detached from the perimeter squad and stepped directly into her path. Maya Sterling, the taller agent said, pulling a separate warrant from her jacket pocket. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and felony forgery. Place your hands behind your back." Maya's hysterical sobbing stopped instantly, replaced by wide-eyed sheer terror. She whipped her head around, looking desperately up at the stage where our parents stood frozen in horror. "Mom," she shrieked, her voice cracking with raw panic. "Dad, do something. Call the mayor. Call somebody." But Warren and Cynthia did not move. They were completely paralyzed, staring at the federal agents slapping handcuffs onto their golden child. The crowd of elites they had spent 20 years trying to impress physically backed away from the stage, treating my family like a highly contagious disease. I watched from the side of the ballroom, my posture straight and unwavering, as the agents marched my sister out of the venue right behind her husband. The beautiful, flawless facade they had weaponized against me for a decade and a half was incinerated in less than 5 minutes. The fallout the next morning was swift, clinical, and utterly brutal. I stood in the quiet sanctuary of my downtown corporate office, drinking a hot cup of black coffee as I watched the local news coverage dominate every single channel on my monitor wall. The federal asset forfeiture protocols were executed with zero hesitation. Just after dawn, a fleet of government vehicles pulled up to my parents' sprawling gated estate in Buckhead. Armed federal marshals marched up the same aggregate driveway I had driven away from. They slapped massive fluorescent seizure notices onto the mahogany front doors. The state traced the laundered consulting fees Trent had funneled directly into my parents' accounts, proving the estate had been maintained using the proceeds of a massive financial crime. Because my parents had knowingly accepted stolen funds to cover their margin calls and mortgage defaults, the federal government seized the entire property to pay back the restitution and massive punitive fines. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of Warren and Cynthia being forced out of their own home. They were carrying hastily packed cardboard boxes stripped of their designer luggage and their dignity. I watched my mother shield her face from the cameras with a silk scarf, her beloved high society empire crumbling to ash in the morning sun. My father looked lost. A man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of superiority, suddenly reduced to a public cautionary tale. Their social exile was immediate and absolute. The country clubs revoked their memberships before lunchtime. The charity boards demanded their immediate resignations. The wealthy friends they had prioritized over their own daughter blocked their phone numbers and deleted them from their contact lists. In the elite circles, they worshipped proximity to a federal indictment was a terminal illness. They had sold their souls and betrayed their own blood to maintain a seat at a table that permanently rejected them the second they lost their money. I did not gloat. I did not drive past their foreclosed house to laugh at their misery, and I did not answer the frantic, desperate voicemails my father left on my phone, begging for legal assistance and financial help. I simply forwarded their communications to my legal team and changed my number. I offered them no bridge to reconciliation, no tearful family therapy sessions, and no forgiveness. Forgiveness implies a debt to be collected, and I owed them absolutely nothing. The true victory was never about destroying them. It was about reclaiming my power, completely removing their toxic influence from my atmosphere and securing the safety of the one person who mattered. They were simply facing the cold, hard, natural consequences of their own boundless greed. The narrative of my life shifted entirely in the weeks that followed. I transitioned from the defensive posture of a survivor to the peaceful reality of a woman who had finally secured her peace. I liquidated a portion of my own clean corporate assets and purchased a stunning, sprawling single-story property nestled in a quiet, heavily wooded neighborhood just outside the city. It featured wide, accessible hallways, massive floor-to-ceiling windows, and a beautiful wrap-around porch that captured the morning light. I hired a team of top-tier private medical professionals out of my own pocket, ensuring round-the-clock care, physical therapy, and culinary support. I did not use a single dime of the $2 million we successfully routed back to the primary trust account. That money was secured in a legally fortified ironclad portfolio meant solely to ensure that Grandma Ruby would never have to worry about a single financial decision for the rest of her long life. 3 months after the gala, I walked out onto the sunlit patio of our new home. The Georgia morning was crisp, and the air smelled of blooming jasmine and fresh earth. Grandma Ruby was sitting comfortably in a plush wicker armchair, wrapped in a soft cashmere shawl. A steaming cup of herbal tea rested on the glass table beside her. She looked healthier and more vibrant than she had in years, the heavy stress of my parents' toxic environment completely washed away from her face. I sat down in the chair next to her, letting the quiet serenity of the backyard wash over me. The contrast between this peaceful sanctuary and the chaotic, screaming hostility of my parents' house was profound. Here, there were no expectations to perform, no harsh criticisms about my choices, and no constant demands to measure up to a shallow societal standard. There was just quiet, unconditional love. "I brought you the updated portfolio reports," I said, setting a thin blue folder on the table. The legal team finally finished transferring the last of the recovered funds from the offshore accounts. The trust is completely sealed. Nobody can ever touch it again. Grandma Ruby did not even look at the folder. She turned her head and looked at me, her sharp dark eyes crinkling at the corners with deep, profound affection. She reached over, her warm, weathered hand covering mine. She patted my knuckles gently, a gesture that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken thank yous. "I do not need to look at those papers, Kiara," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I trust you with my life. You proved that to me the moment you broke down that steel door and pulled me out of the dark." She took a slow sip of her tea, looking out at the heavy green foliage swaying gently in the morning breeze. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "I always knew my bluebird would fly," she murmured, setting the teacup down. "They tried so hard to clip your wings because they were terrified of how high you could soar without them. Look at you now. You built your own sky." I squeezed her hand, leaning back in my chair, as a profound sense of closure settled deep into my bones. For 15 years, I had carried the heavy, suffocating weight of being the family disappointment. I had internalized their mockery, their exclusion, and their constant demands, that I conformed to a mold that was fundamentally designed to break me. I had survived in the shadows, building my strength drop by drop, dollar by dollar, while they mocked the very hustle that ultimately destroyed them. True success, I realized, looking out at the peaceful sanctuary I had built with my own two hands, has absolutely nothing to do with conforming to a toxic family's shallow expectations. It is not found in country club memberships, designer labels, or the hollow applause of strangers at a charity gala. True success is the quiet, unshakable peace of a fiercely independent life built entirely on your own terms. It is knowing that when the storms come and the carefully constructed illusions of the world shatter into pieces, you have the strength, the resources, and the unyielding moral compass to protect the people who actually matter. They called me a useless failure because I refused to play their game. I walked away, completely redefined the rules, and ended up owning the entire board. True success and security are never defined by toxic family expectations or superficial social validation. When the very people who are supposed to protect you try to tear you down, you must become your own absolute sanctuary. Kiara's journey teaches us that financial and emotional independence is the ultimate weapon against manipulation. Blood does not automatically make someone family. True family is defined by mutual respect, fierce protection, and unconditional love. By stepping out of the scapegoat shadow and building her own unshakable foundation, she reclaimed her narrative. Your inherent worth is determined by your resilience, never by their rejection. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace and build your own empire, share your story in the comments below and hit subscribe for more empowering content.